This is the final part of 4.3, quantitative data. So what exactly is quantitative data? Quantitative data is measures or values or counts that is expressed as a number, so it's numerical values. So this could be how far do you reach in a sit and reach test, that would be numerical. How high do you jump in a vertical jump test, also numerical. So you have qualitative, which I mentioned before in a previous video, which is data that is displayed in words. So it can be people's feelings, their point of view on anything, stuff like that. Whereas this is just numerical. How do we display this data? So this data is usually displayed in a table. So you could have a bunch of people all doing the exact same test, and then from that test, you can then write down everyone's results. You can also display it in a graph, which is easily read, so you can see if there's a correlation between anything. Which, like if you're looking for correlations between anything, that's what we actually get from quantitative data. We can see if there's a relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable. We can see if the independent variable that you are manipulating as a researcher, you can see if that influences the dependent variable in any way. Next, we're moving on to the collection methods of quantitative data. So this can be laboratory-based, field-based, questionnaires, observations, stuff like that. But what exactly is a laboratory-based experiment? So this is where you go into a lab and then you just test people in the lab. But there are problems with this, such as the cost of the lab. So sorry, to like get time in a lab, you need to pay quite a bit of money, and if you're doing quite a lengthy experiment, then obviously the cost will rack up. Also, it creates a very fake situation that you're in. Say you're testing a gymnast for their like flexibility to see how good they are in a routine, anything like that. Because they're not in their natural environment when they're performing, it could very much alter the results that you're getting. It like changes the ecological validity. Again, access. This is like cost as well. Because you need to get access to lots of different equipment. It will also rack up the cost. You'll also need someone who's experienced and they've been trained in a lab to actually help you conduct the experiment if you're not trained, because otherwise you might not know what you're doing with all the equipment. But there are some advantages to it as well. Because you're using really high-end equipment, you're able to see clear results, and it's very precise and accurate. You're able to also analyze this data in a lot of depth whilst you're in the lab, which can also help. Again, you'll easily be able to see if the independent variable does affect the dependent variable, because you will have all the results set right in front of you when you're doing it. There's also high, like I said, high internal validity, so you're able to see the effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable. So next is field experiments or field research. This is where you're in the, say you're experimenting on a gymnast. You're in their natural habitat, so just in a gymnasium, in their local club, something like that. So yeah, that will produce more accurate results in a way, because they won't be getting influenced by the lab. They'll understand what everything is, what to do with everything. It will also be a low cost, or much lower at least than the lab experiments, and you'll get a higher ecological validity from it all. The disadvantages to this though are you can't say that it was only the independent variable that affects the dependent variable, because it's much harder to control. So you'll just get a lower internal validity, which obviously you don't actually want whilst you're experimenting. It could also be really awkward with equipment getting in the way, because you're not in a lab. You don't know how everything will be actually like in the wherever you're doing the experiment, you don't know if the equipment will get in the way of the person's performance, anything like that. And the equipment you'll be using, because it's not going to be in the lab, and you can't just have them, say, on a treadmill, on an exercise bike, something like that, then the equipment won't be as advanced, so it'll be like a lot of indirect measures. Next up is questionnaires. So this is literally just, if you've got a Word document, you just put down loads of questions, which you can then either print off and hand out, or you can just email to loads of people, which is an advantage to them. They're basically just to find out some limited information about people. So yeah, advantages of this would be they're quick, they're easy to do. Don't need to disclose personal information and stuff like that. But if you are emailing it to people, you obviously know their names, you will know their email address, stuff like that, so just don't let that go out. So you need to be careful of that. Disadvantages, again, it's just not a lot of data that you're gathering. It's pretty much just going to be like yes or no questions, not really how they feel about anything. It'll be very limited answers. Observations. This is where you sit in on something, say a gymnast is doing a routine, or they're having a class, they're training. You're sitting on it, and you will either partake or you'll just watch. If you partake in it, then usually what people do is they don't actually disclose that they're a researcher. They usually just join in and then use this data, which obviously comes with some ethical issues, because if the people that don't know that they're being monitored, then it is quite controversial. But at the same time, if you tell them that you're observing them, then they might not perform in their normal way. They might want to impress you, or just perform better to a higher standard, stuff like that, which as a researcher isn't exactly what you want. You kind of want true results, you want what they're actually like, which would just be more useful to you as a researcher. Next up is the experiment designs. So here I've put control and experimental groups, dependent or repeated measure, and matched pairs. So for control and experimental groups, basically you will have one group who you are controlling, and they don't get influenced by the thing that you're manipulating. And then you've got the experimental group, which do get influenced by the thing that you are manipulating, such as like you could just have one group, the control group, doing something, say they're doing a routine without having an extra substance that they've taken, and then you can compare their results to the experimental groups, and you can see the difference in the norms. When you're doing this, you will want to make sure that you randomly allocate the participants to each group, so it reduces a lot of bias. Next up is dependent or repeated measure. This is quite literally where you just repeat the experiment, hence repeated measure. You repeat the experiment with the same participants to see if there's any change in their results. So you could do this multiple times, you could do it once, it's whatever you feel like doing, and then you just compare it, or compare their results to one another. And then matched pairs. Matched pairs is when you get so you've got two groups, and then you match up the people that say are in the same weight class, the same height, anything like that, any similarities between them, you like pair them up that way. This helps like comparing results is a big part of this. And I think that's about it. Thank you very much for watching my 4.3.